Welcome back. This is I-24 News Evening Edition. This is the Daily Debate. Boycott over the last few days. This word dominated the Israeli political arena. Secretary of State John Kerry warned Israel that not accepting the U.S. framework for peace could end in a large movement of boycotting Israel products in the world. So, in the world's eyes, could Israel turn into South Africa of 1980s? We'll look at the issue and try to find some answers in tonight's debate. Joining me tonight is Stuart Newbeger, senior partner at the Newbeger, right? Yes, I said it. I swallowed the name. And Dr. Shuki Freidman, from the Paris Academic Center Law School. Thank you both for coming to the studio. So, do you think that maybe Israel should finally accept the framework and stop the whole finger pointing at Israel and the government?
I think my Israeli friend should answer that first.
There is a matter of policy, a matter of comparing Israel to South Africa. Whoever compares Israel to South Africa is racist and anti-Semitic. There is no reason, no base for this comparison. If you check it out, the South African apartheid was much severe, completely different, established by laws for 50 years. And this is not the case in Israel.
No, but we're not comparing. We're trying to maybe put the outcome might be similar.
We, as Israel, should consider our interest, not taking into consideration this BDS campaign. The BDS campaign is doing one thing, is ruining the potential to have peace in the Middle East. And if it goes forward, it only put the Palestinians in the corner, made them stand on the line, not compromise on anything, and get the opposite of what they want to get from this campaign. No, it's an illegal campaign internationally. It's illegitimate campaign, and in my perspective, it's nearly anti-Semitic campaign.
Well, I don't disagree with my friend Dr. Freidman, but I also bring a different perspective from a lawyer working in Washington and doing international law. One of the things that I see, particularly with this so-called boycott movement of Israeli products, is that it violates international law, separate from the peace process and all the other issues. And so from where I sit, when I see this, I also see that there are legal consequences for the people who attempt to mount such a boycott. And it could be that Israeli companies, Israeli citizens who are hurt by this might have legal remedies to go after people who bring these sort of things around. And like I said, I come from a different perspective than Dr. Freidman. We arrive at the same place, but in a different way.
Do the international community understand that maybe sometimes boycotting Israel is actually boycotting the Palestinians? Because a lot of Palestinians are working in the settlements, are working in Palestinian, in Israel, in Jewish fabrics, and it's actually hurting both sides.
Well, I think the perfect example of that is the silliness about the SodaStream
yes.
commercial that was supposed to be on the Super Bowl, and Scarlett Johansson, the famous actress, as the spokesperson, and the people in Oxfam, which is part of the boycott movement, clearly were attempting to punish an Israeli company, a very successful international company, which ironically is giving great jobs to both Israeli Arabs and Palestinian Arabs,
yes,
jobs they would not be able to get otherwise. And I think that this is part of what's so misleading about the people who are leading these boycott efforts and trying to make trouble for SodaStream and other companies like that. They really have their own agendas, as Dr. Freidman said. They're not really giving the truth about what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that's the biggest truth to reveal about these things.
So on the other side, we know that settlements are illegal by international law. So
no, it's something you put on the table that as a common knowledge or completely agreed statement. But generally speaking, there are different views about it, and not only locally but also globally, there are people that emphasize it, not necessarily all settlements are illegal, but now we are negotiating with the Palestinians to define what is legal and what is not legal. It's true that UN and other international entities declared some settlements or settlement to be
Israel
illegal.
already recognized that it is occupying the territories in the West Bank, in some territories in the West Bank. We know that the word occupation is not a foreign word anymore in the Israeli society, and Israel doesn't understand that it's actually not working for her benefit, for its benefit to stay in the West Bank.
That's a different issue. I'd defer to Dr. Freidman on that. I mean, he's much more familiar with that.
There is a political question and a matter of interest over here. In a political perspective, we can say the politicians should decide what is an interest of Israel. Some will say our interest to keep the West Bank occupied or held by the Israelis for good, because this is our national security and security interest, completely straightforward. Others will say vice versa. But I want to attack the BDS campaign. If you want to practically have a solution or get a solution, if you BDS Israel, you won't get there. And if you look at the West Bank today and see what Israel have made to Palestinian prosperity through the years, through so-called industrial zones that actually give finance to huge amount of number of Palestinians, you see that this sort of occupation actually led to a much stronger economically West Bank population. And if you compare West Bank and Gaza Strip, for example, you'll see the differences. Now, the realization of...
On the other side, you can say that continuing to occupy the territories and not providing a welfare and try to help the Palestinian community is not actually even benefiting in the benefits for Israel as well.
Well, like Dr. Freidman said, there's a political issue, there are social issues, there are economic, and there are legal. So when someone uses the label illegal settlements, for the word you used a minute ago, some organizations have said they are illegal. Others have said they're not. There have been some very distinguished international jurists who said that when the Jordanian army withdrew from the West Bank, because remember, it was Jordan. There was no independent country of Palestine.
Is it legal?
There may be in the future. And frankly, as an American, I hope there is. But only the Israelis and the Palestinians can work that out in a political framework. I believe what Dr. Freidman is emphasizing is to put labels, whether it's a legal label like illegal or an economic label like boycott, does not assist the people who have to make the tough decisions, meaning Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Abbas, and the people with them. That's what counts.
Can we compare it maybe to a certain sanctions that the international community is putting on Israel?
Well, I think you have to be
under the word boycott?
Well, whether you want to call it boycott or sanctions, you have to be very careful with words. As a lawyer who does international law, I'm very careful with words. And sanctions are not what we're talking about. Sanctions are what the United Nations used to get Gaddafi to give up nuclear weapons. Sanctions are what the world is using to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons. That's when the world acts in concert officially through governmental action, democratic action, to have a terrorist state or a dictatorship act a different way. That is not what's going on here. What's going on here is there is a political question, a very serious one. And I'm not in any way saying it's not a serious question that must be taken seriously. But at the end of the day, putting those labels on them is not going to help the people who live there or the people who live on the other side of the Green Line come to peace and have peace for their children and their grandchildren, which is what I think people want.
I must add, you see some European banks recently boycotting Israel, claiming that it's breaching international law, but practically it's not a matter of law, it's a matter of politics. Now, if you want to make politics through economy, it's in some cases legit, but don't at least expose yourself as supporting international law or promoting some international interest, but you're practically supporting or promoting an interest of one side. Now, promoting interest of one side is discrimination in legal terms.
So let's, I want to join, are you with me on the phone, Adam?
Yes,
Yes, Adam Keller, the spokesperson for Gush Shalom. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for this small conversation that we were having here. Are you pro the boycotting of Israel?
I'm not pro the boycotting of Israel. I think the boycotting of Israel, which is going on and getting momentum more and more, is a fact which Israel has to take into account. It is a fact that the idea of boycotting Israel as such, and even more the idea of boycotting the settlements which Israel is building in the occupied territories, is gathering momentum worldwide among civil society, more and more also on the governmental level. And it is something which has to do directly with the policies of the government of Israel. And it is a fact that Israel is already 47 years occupying Palestinians, keeping them under military occupation, building settlements in the territories of the Palestinians, which the whole world is recognizing as territories which should be Palestinian state, with a specific aim, which ministers in the government of Israel are saying very explicit, that these territories will remain under Israeli rule. And the world is opposed to that. And I think that John Kerry did what a friend should do. He warned Israel that the way that Israel is now heading is leading towards international boycott, towards isolation, and it is an objective fact.
Mr. Keller, you don't think that it's maybe an internal Israeli dispute that Israel should try to solve it inside?
It is both an internal Israeli dispute. It is the most main issue of Israeli politics in the last 47 years, for more than 2/3 of the whole history of Israel. But it is also a worldwide dispute. It is something which the whole world is taking interest in, which Europeans are taking interest in, which Americans take interest in, which Russians take interest in, Chinese, everybody in the world. And we have the
Yes.
issue between Israel and the Palestinians is an internationalized issue. And Zionism, I want to say, historically, Zionism has made it an international issue. When we were the ones who were demanding to have a state of our own, we
Mr.
came to the European community and asked the Israelis...
Mr. Keller, I just want to let the gentleman here in the studio to answer. Thank you very much for this phone call and for your point of view. Mr. Freidman?
He made the right point, okay? Zionism from the first moment became a world question. And therefore, from the very first second of the establishment of the State of Israel, there have been a boycott against Israel. There's a Arab boycott for long years, still remains some places, and there is a different boycott for different wars and different reasons, but always people from Arab world or European states tried to boycott Israel. Now, Israel through the years, if it in the past would take into consideration these boycotts as something it should consider in its foreign policy or security policies, we wouldn't be here practically, because everybody tried to struggle us with this means of boycott. Now, the guy made a point, okay? There's not much difference between 48 and 2014. People continue to boycott Israel because Israel is a Zionist state here.
Mr. Newbeger, last statement before we're finishing.
Well, I think to pick up on Dr. Freidman's point, but with a little different perspective, you know, when the Arab world boycotted Israel, not the West Bank, not Gaza, but Israel as a country, in the United States, where I practice and I live, the United States made that illegal. And so when you know, the Egyptians and the Saudis and the Gulf states were saying, let's not do any business with anybody in Tel Aviv. Forget about Ramallah, okay, or a so-called settlement. The United States said, any U.S. company that complies with that boycott can be in very serious trouble legally with the U.S. government and pay huge fines. So the definition of illegal and boycott, it depends on the eye of who is saying it.
Yeah, but I cannot boycott the break that we're going to have.
There you go.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this discussion. And we're going out for a small break, 10 minutes break, and update from our news desk. And then we will be back for the I-24 News one-on-one. Don't go anywhere.